Hi everyone. I just wanted to share a couple of adjustments that I've made to my beginner RC Powers Mig-29 version 1 here since I shot that maiden flying video. After the video, I flew probably about another 5 flights, so I've got about a half a dozen flights on this plane now. Just sort of doing the fine tuning that I like to do to get my plane balanced and set up the way that I wanted to. So a couple of things. I did ended up moving my battery back just a tiny little bit. I think maybe an eighth of an inch, quarter of an inch at the most. I mean, that's very fine tuning. But one thing you want to do is, unless your plane is like really seriously nose heavy, where it's constantly wanting to make dives for the dirt, or it's tail heavy and it's pardon me, flailing around really hard to control, is I don't tend to like to move my battery, especially when I'm using a big, fairly heavy 2200 milliamp battery. I don't tend to like to move it too much. I might move it maybe quarter to a half an inch maximum, to compensate, fly it again, and then, as it gets closer and closer to being balanced, make the movements just, a little bit less until you get it really dialed in. So what I did was when I came home, you remember probably in the video that I was having the plane was wanting to roll left quite a bit, and I was putting in quite a bit of right trim. Now trim is it's not a bad thing, but if you're if you end up in a situation where you've got like 3/4 or all of your trim to the right, let's say, then that's not, there's probably something else going on with your plane that you need to look at. So what I did was, after I came home after the flight session, is I just jotted down the number of clicks of trim that I had, and then what I did was I zeroed out the trim, put it back to neutral, and what I found was that my left elevon was deflected by maybe just a couple of millimeters, like not a whole lot, but in a in a fairly small light plane like this one, it was probably making a bit of difference. So what I did was I adjusted it. So now at zero trim, again, I'm dead even with the right one. Now what happens here is, it's not really an error or anything. It happens to me on almost every single plane. It's not that you've made an error or anything in the build. Just what happens is, with these foam planes, you get out there and when you've built it, you haven't really put any force or torque or anything on the control surfaces or the linkages, the push rod, servos. So sometimes what happens is you get flying and they get some pressure and some movement put on them, is that the hinges will break in and everything just starts to get sort of get seated, and then you may end up finding out you have a situation where one of your control surfaces is not quite dead center at zero trim anymore. So that's why I did that, and then once I was happy that that was dead center, we should be good to go. And I may still need to trim it. I don't know. We won't know that till we fly it. But at least now I'm not trimming. What I try to avoid anyway is having a situation where I've got a control surface that's out of alignment at zero trim, so that I'm falsely trimming against that not being dead center. So hopefully we've fixed that a little bit. Another thing that I noticed, and this is despite all my talking about it and spending so much time trying to get the motor aligned during the build series, was that I noticed my motor was slightly off center here. It was maybe by only a couple of degrees, but it was if I can do this, it was sort of, if this is dead center, it was just angled slightly that way. Now that's an exaggeration. So I think that might have also been causing, contributing a little bit maybe to it wanting to roll to the left, and maybe with the excess, it had a bit, it might have also contributed to the torque roll. Normally if you have your motor, even, if your motor's off by a little bit, when you're flying around, just, cruising around doing your thing, you're not really going to notice it. But if the motor is out of alignment, as you accelerate and the plane gains speed, is then the motor being slightly out of alignment, it will cause it to do, the motor misalignment will cause it to do things you really don't want it to do. Sometimes if the motor is not aligned correctly in the pitch axis, like let's say it's angled up, it may cause the plane to want to zoom, or if it's angled down too far, it may want to cause the plane to dive, and that normally, like I said, that normally doesn't become a factor until until you put on full throttle and you really accelerated. So what I did was I left them in so you could see it. You can see I've got a toothpick sticking out here, and I've got another one down here. So what I did is I just used these toothpicks, with they're sort of got the tapered pointed edge on them, end on them. And what I did was I loosened off my 2 screws on the left-hand side here, and then I just sort of gently slid the toothpick in until the motor seemed to be dead center, and then I tightened the screws down. Now I'll break those toothpicks off before my next flying session, but I wanted to leave them there so you could see them. So anyway, that's the second adjustment that I made. The other thing that I did was, once I was happy where my battery was, I've actually transferred my center of gravity mark out onto the wing here. You can see this blob of black here is actually where my plane balances best for the way that I like to fly, and I just find it easier for me to flip the plane on its back and then take the just see how it is for balance. So it's kind of sensitive here, but anyway, so there we go. So I think that that's pretty much about as neutrally balanced, at least from the angle where I'm sitting, about as neutrally balanced. So what I've done is I've marked the point, in black marker. So now I know that that's my best balance point. It's, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch ahead of where the CG is on the plans, but that's where I find it's best. So now that I have that sorted out, and I've got my battery, I'm happy with where my battery is. What I did here, hopefully you can see this, was I just took a black magic marker and I made a line where the front of my battery is going to go, and I wrote, I know it's tough to see here, but I wrote a 2.2, so for 2200, because that's what I've got in here right now, milliamp battery. So now that I've got my optimal balance point marked, is, I know now it should be just automatic. I put the battery in so the front of the battery lines up with that line. Now if I wanted to say, I'm flying, I want to have a little bit more speed and agility, and I'm flying on a fairly calm day, and I might want to use a lighter battery, like say a 1600 or 1800. So now that I know that this is my optimal balance point where I've got these black marks, is then I can put the 1600 or 1800 battery in there, go through the same process as we did before the maiden, get it balanced on that point, fly it a couple times just to make sure that it is balanced, and then where your lighter battery is, then you can make the second mark and then write 1.6 or 1.8. And the reason I say that is in that way you won't have any confusion. If you haven't flown the plane in a while and you've got 2 marks there but they're not labeled, you won't make a mistake of putting the 2200 battery where the 1600 battery is supposed to go, or vice versa, which could then cause you some real issues. So anyway, I wanted to share those slight adjustments with you. Half a dozen flights with a fairly simple plane here, like the Mig-29, where it's just elevons only, is normally pretty good. There may be some other fine tuning that I need to do over the next couple of flying sessions, but I think hopefully these adjustments that I've made are going to take care of a little bit of that trim that we had to have in the right to keep it from wanting to roll to the left all the time, and adjusting the motor will help. Sometimes with a more complex plane where I've got ailerons, rudders, and all that sort of stuff, it may take a few more flights, at least I find anyway, to get those little fine details sorted out. But you want to give yourself a few flights again to let everything, the hinges and the linkages and all that sort of stuff work itself in, and sort of get the plane under some stress of flying, and then go back and check those surfaces, and just to make sure that you're not trimming against a surface that's not dead center at zero trim. So there we go. Learning as we go along, which is what this series is all about. So once we get out to the field, get a chance to get out to the field again and fly it, we'll see. I'll see how those adjustments worked out, if they helped, or not made any difference, or touch wood, hopefully didn't make them make it worse. So thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.